update. What we'll cover today is highlights. We'll highlight some of the project milestones. We'll share some of the planning process that's taking place to date and talk about next steps. What is the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, or MTP? It's a long-term strategic framework for us to define vision and goals for our transportation system here in the region. We do this because it guides investment decisions. It ensures that we obtain federal funding. The MTP has to be in place as part of our overall transportation planning process. And it promotes good coordination between local partners, state agencies, and federal government. I will take a moment just to plug that we have a project, like a publicly accessible plain language project webpage called Connections2050. And there's a URL here on the slide. And when we post this on our webpage, you can use that link to get to it. It's bit.ly/SNHPC2050. So I encourage people to go check out the webpage. A lot of the things I reference in here, the documents are on that page. Eric.
How long has that been up on the site?
We started the project about a year ago, the update process. And that webpage has been up since around September. We actually use it as a launching point for engaging local stakeholders, our town planners and officials, and then subsequently conducted a public survey and used the webpage as a launching point for the public survey. And we thought this was easier than trying to do it on the SNHPC webpage, because then people would have to understand first what is SNHPC and then an MTP and why am I taking this survey. And the way that the survey was structured was much plainer language, easy to understand for somebody that knew nothing about the transportation planning process. And that approach paid off, actually. We had almost 500 people participate in the survey. So it was a good approach. Let's talk about that later, but you asked questions, so I jumped ahead a little. So to date, these are the milestones we've hit. We've put together a desk review of transportation plans at the local, regional, state level. We've conducted interviews of municipal stakeholders. That's your local town administrator or managers in smaller towns, your town, your director of planning, and if the town's a little larger, we've met with engineering staff, and in some instances, directors of public works. We put together a public survey, as I mentioned a moment ago, to asking people what their priorities were for transportation in the region. We've drafted existing conditions chapter, drafted goals and objectives, and drafted a system performance report. And I'll talk a little bit more about those as we go along. So the desk review, the big takeaway here, I won't read all of this, but the big takeaway from all of this is that it's apparent that our region is reliant on private automobiles for people to get around. Probably nearly all of you here today arrived here in your own private car, and will go about the rest of your tasks today in your own private car. And it's worth acknowledging that within this region, that is the default mode of transportation. One of the things we heard or saw in many of these reports is that there's a desire for addressing some needs around, especially aging demographics, where we're going to have, as a region, have a growing proportion of the population who are non-drivers. As I mentioned, we looked at local, regional, state plans. This just kind of lists some of the things we talked about. At the local level, that's your master plans. At the regional level, we run something called a congestion management process, which identifies areas of congestion and strategies for mitigating that congestion. At the state level, the state has a long-range transportation plan, and you guys hear, ad nauseum about the 10-year plan. And so those things all guide our decision-making in the MTP. We reviewed a total of 22 plans, plus each of the town's master plans. And from that, we derived a variety of goals and objectives and measures that were related to transportation. And we cataloged all those to inform our drafting of goals and objectives for the MTP. Why do we do this? Well, as I just mentioned, we want to align our goals with the goals of our local communities in the state. We want to identify potential projects for inclusion in the MTP, and we wanted to know what questions to ask our local stakeholders. So definitely leads me to the next milestone that we undertook, and that's stakeholder interviews. For this, we identified transportation themes in the region, and we asked each of our stakeholders about them. And we reported, we documented those stakeholders identified transportation priorities. We asked them about preferred means for connecting with their local population. And we also, because we're in the midst of updating our regional comprehensive plan, we took this opportunity to also ask them about desired future outcomes for land use. Core themes we heard from that, again, reliance on the automobile. There's a significant shift in travel patterns post-COVID-19 with people working from home 1 or more days a week, and that changing the trip patterns, how people commute later in the day, earlier in the afternoon, with less peaks. And we also heard in nearly every community that the aging population was a significant concern because the towns weren't sure how they were going to be able to service their needs. Some other things we heard relative to the transportation landscape is that safety is a priority and that local control and identity of projects was a priority. These are things that were mentioned multiple times. Things we also heard a couple of different times were that rail and tourism did not have an access with local mobility needs, and that's somewhat unsurprising, especially in the rural areas. And that emerging technologies have the potential to improve the region's transportation outcomes. And that took many different forms. People talking about new technologies that can reduce the cost of roadway preservation, people talking about electric vehicles, people talking about autonomous vehicles and trip services and delivery services, so a wide range of technologies. All right, so we got through those stakeholder interviews, we documented that. It's all on the Connections 2050 webpage, which I encourage you to check out and read. And then we use that to inform our public outreach survey. So the first thing we did, as I mentioned in response to Errol's question, was we created this Connections 2050 webpage with plain language about what is a regional, what is this long-range transportation planning exercise that we're doing. From there, we solicited participation in a survey, and we asked people to give us information about what their priorities were. What did we hear? Well, we heard that transportation choice was the #1 priority in the region. People want us to invest in more travel options, including shuttle services and active transportation, multimodal facilities, I should say. The second was housing and transportation, and the way the question was posed here is, our transportation decisions have a direct correlation to our land use impacts. So, if you build a road somewhere, that road will have driveways and then the land around the road will be developed. And that depending on how you invest in transportation, can inform the kind of housing that you get. So we laid that out, and a majority of the survey respondents felt that this was a priority to address housing through transportation investments. And then the third was safety and efficiency. And that really comes down to make sure the roads are well maintained, the roads are free flowing, and that people are not getting hurt or dying on the roads. Just under 2/3 of respondents selected safety and efficiency as a transportation priority. But we also collected demographic data from survey respondents as an optional thing. And for the respondents that did give us demographic data, we saw that there was a somewhat, an increase in the priority of safety for respondents who identified as minorities. We thought that was notable. Next milestone, we drafted an existing conditions chapter, and that really looks at all the modes of transportation and also factors that inform transportation behavior, like housing and employment. One of the most important parts of documenting the existing condition is identifying where the roads are that we care about. We care about all the roads, but we, as part of a federally funded system, what are those roads and what are their shape and size? And so we include in the MTP a map of the functional classification of roads, which are not local roads. These are roads that really would fall under federal aid eligibility. We define trends in population. Is the population increasing or decreasing? Is housing being built? Do jobs exist in the locality? And all those things together define travel patterns. We talked about this slide. One other thing I didn't mention is, one of the unique patterns, well, I wouldn't say it's unique. One of the patterns that we noticed that's very strong in the region is the proximity of commercial activity, retail strips, to highway exits, and really all kinds of jobs. And there is a tiny little map on the wall. Sorry for people online, but there's a tiny little map on the corkboard wall that Zach made that's got little yellow circles on it. And that is indicates all the places that are within, I think it's a 1 or 2 mile distance from a highway exit. And a large majority of the overall development in our region exists within 2 miles of a highway exit. It's something like 80 something percent. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it is a staggering figure, and it is a pattern that significantly plays into the shape of our transportation network. We have other modes that are really important as well. The existing conditions chapter identifies where rail lines exist. It talks about plans that have been crafted around the commuter rail service and the Capital Corridor, describes MTA and the role MTA, CART, and other ridership services play in getting people to the places they need to get. It talks about community transportation. So that this is really, I'd say, Sylvia is the champion of community transportation in our office, and Ben. And, one notable fact about community transportation is that in 2023, over 15,000 trips on-demand trips were provided to citizens within our region. And so that's, you pick up the phone, you call, and you say, I need to get to a medical appointment, or I need to go buy my groceries. And somebody's able to drive a car to the door of that person on the phone, or a bus or a shuttle bus. Yeah. One other thing I like to note, because I think it's a really important asset in our region, is Londonderry Exit 5 Park and Ride. There are 728 parking spaces there. And if you go there during, let's say a busy air travel period of the year, it's not uncommon to see that parking lot hit full capacity, which speaks to greater demand for that kind of service and the facilities that support that service. That is bus rides to Boston. Existing conditions chapter talks about bike and pet facilities. We have many multi-use paths. We have what I think is something that SNHPC does very well, which is we have over 50 bicycle and pedestrian volume counts that we collect across the region. So, if you go and look at the other MPOs in the state, I think, comparatively, we do an excellent job collecting and have been collecting historic data on how people use our active transportation facilities. And that's really important, because when you can put a number behind a facility like this, you can demonstrate its benefit and its value to the community as a way to get around without having to rely on a car. And then in addition to this, we also do a lot of activity around, I shouldn't say a lot, we do activity around complete streets, which we're calling streets designed for all users, and transportation demand. So that's, strategies we might use to limit peak travel demand. So car ride, car sharing, carpooling, staggered work shifts, work from home, things of that nature. We also talk about intermodal and freight. So we're very lucky here to have the Manchester Boston Airport. So that is documented in the existing conditions chapter. And Dave in our office has done a fantastic job updating our documentation for freight facilities and freight need. And so we incorporate that into the MTP as well. All this leads to the next milestone here, which is goals and objectives. The goals and objectives are informed by a vision, which we've drawn from the regional comprehensive plan. And the vision helps frame the desired outcome or condition that we want the region to have in the future. It's very broad-based, doesn't have a lot of detail. And then what happens is you go down the cone, you get more and more refined and detailed information. So from a vision, you can derive goals, and from goals, you can set a few objectives. And from all those things, you can track your performance through measures. And we do that here. We're actually required by the federal government to track measures for certain activities. Things like roadway and transit safety, the condition of our roads, whether our roads have a lot of traffic and congestion on them. And so we report those things out on a periodic basis to the MPO. And we also incorporate them into the goals and objectives of our MTP. And so I'll take a minute here and just rattle off 8 goals that exist in our MTP, draft goals as they're written in the MTP. And they all start with the same phrase: a transportation system that is safe and secure, efficient and reliable, supportive of the economy, flexible and offers choice, environmentally sound, land use smart, works for the public, and financially sustainable. Each one of these goals has between 3 and 5 objectives, and the objectives are really directional, setting a direction that we want to go in terms of achieving a goal. And so on this slide, I give the example of decreased transportation related fatalities and serious injuries. And that's something we measured. It's something we make progress towards, and something we report out to the MPO. From there, you get into more fine-grained things. We talked about the measures. And with all that, we've covered the milestones of what's been completed thus far. And I just want to note before we wrap up that in the next few months, we'll be completing a travel demand forecast, which is a traffic model that will tell us where we may have capacity issues in our transportation network on federal aid roads. We'll be selecting projects, which is largely derived from the TIP process and from what has been identified from our local municipalities. Nate, who is the master of managing the transportation improvement plan and projects within it, will provide a financial analysis for the MTP, and then we'll get a draft report out for public comment by the fall. The MTP needs to be approved by December 31st, and we want to make sure that we leave ample time for public comment and to respond to those public comments. So we're targeting September to try to have a draft report ready for public comment. And with that, I'm wrapped up. And if anybody has questions, I'm happy to take them.
Any questions for James?
Okay, is every planning commission, regional planning commission, doing this same type of study?
Not every commission in the state, but every MPO. So all the southern planning commissions,